Genesis 37, as Murray said, it's the whole thing. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he had made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brother had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off to the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "Well, they have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." Well, his brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it and see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph to Egypt, in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard.
Well, good morning. Well, now, when we had that read to us, did anyone go, hang on, didn't we read this last week? Yeah. Did you think you were familiar with it last week? Did you, as it was read to us, did you go, oh, hang on, I didn't pick that up last week. Did anyone do that? Did you pick something else new out of that passage this morning? Oh, Mars bar, if you did find something. Too late. Well, maybe we'll have another look and maybe you'll see some other things. So, question for you. Have you ever watched a movie or a documentary on mountains? That'll do. Mountain goats, yeah? Climbing them. Maybe you've seen a movie on Everest. Maybe last year you watched Sherpa on Netflix. No? Oh. Well, I like watching movies on mountains, scaling the unscalable, vertical limit, Cliffhanger, except you couldn't understand what Sylvester Stallone said in Cliffhanger. The stories of Everest, Hillary, that was his name, wasn't it? So Edmund Hillary, yeah. It's pretty cool to watch one of those documentaries or those, following them. And of course, we get to do so sitting in our leatherback chair with our cup of hot chocolate in hand, warming the cockles of our heart by the fire with our lovely fluffy socks on. Meanwhile, the person on the TV is freezing to death, losing fingers, losing toes. But of course, who's the expert? Of course I am, watching. Dude, there's a storm coming. Why don't you use more ropes? Why don't you go that way? Why'd you get that way? Sounds like Dad. Does, doesn't it? Rarely do we get to witness firsthand what it actually took to get there. We only get a glimpse with our hot chocolate in hand. We have no idea, really. If you want to bring that into like a really pertinent thing, the Olympics. Once every 4 years, every person in Australia becomes an expert on how to swim the butterfly. Does anyone swim butterfly here? You can. Yeah, 2 people. Yeah, right? 2 people out of whatever it is here. Yeah, see? But we're all experts while we're watching it on the telly. Oh, they didn't dive, right? They didn't turn, a bit late in the turn. But, we have no idea what it took to get that athlete to the Olympics. We weren't the parent sitting on the cold aluminium seat at 4:00 in the morning watching them swim up and down in a pool and it's like 4 degrees. We weren't there. We didn't see the shoulder reconstruction. We didn't see the tears. We didn't see the missing out on parties and whatever because training has to happen. Yet we become an expert for 1 minute and 20 seconds on how they should swim. We read the chapters of Joseph. We glide over them like it all happened as fast as we read it. And we think that we know what's important. We think we know what should have happened, etc., etc. We think the important bit is the coat. Disney does. We think maybe the important thing is the dream. Let's focus on that. We think appointment to Pharaoh is important. That bit's cool. The brothers are coming. Maybe that's the important bit. But we missed the cost. We missed the cost of getting there, the huge cost of getting Joseph to Egypt so that he can store away and he can distribute. We really have no idea. So, my hope is that we will start to see things with fresh eyes. Last week, this week, next week. So let's have a look. And as we look, I'm hopeful you'll see the foreshadows, more and more foreshadows, more parallels, more pointers forward, more patterns that the promised one will fulfill. The pictures that point to Jesus. So Genesis 37, if you can grab your Bibles, open them, it'll probably be up on we could probably have it back up on the screen for people. But about verse 3, here's Joseph and the 11 brothers. They're doing their thing. Is life normal? Well, I guess it sounds pretty normal. Who thinks that your life might have looked a little bit like this? There's some siblings. The younger one is dobbing to dad on the older ones because they were slacking off for whatever reason. The older ones have no time for the younger one. It's just a pain in the neck. He's always got a runny nose, whatever. But it's not quite that simple. See, here we find there's an extra element at play. Dad has a favourite. Why does he have a favourite? We were talking about this last week. Andrew and I were starting to discuss this last week. Why does Jacob have a favourite? There's a pretty simple rule 4,000 years ago. It goes like this. The firstborn son is dad's favourite. Because it's that son who will carry the line of the family. That son will get the greatest inheritance. That son will be the one to look after the family as you go forward. So the future of the family rests with the firstborn. Honour and privilege belong to the firstborn. A bigger helping at dinner belongs to the firstborn. There's actually a theory out there that the plagues of the Exodus, the one that kills the firstborn, is actually a poisoning because they consumed more food than the other children, and so the firstborn dies because they get too much poison. There's an interesting theory. Now, who should be the firstborn here? Who should be the favourite? It shouldn't be Joseph. It should be Reuben. That's right. It should be Reuben. And why is it not? Because Reuben jumped into dad's bed with one of dad's ladies. That's Genesis 35, verse 21. And Israel heard of it. Jacob heard about it. And so Reuben has forfeited his birthright. He is no longer considered the firstborn. He is tolerated. It's pretty much the last thing that happens in the Israel household before our introduction to Joseph. And so perhaps at this juncture in life, did Jacob look back? Did he look back at the deception of Laban with Leah? Did he look back at the deception, did he look forward then, or presently, to the deception of Reuben? Did he look to his intense love for Rachel and that she has not deceived him? And so he then looks on the firstborn of his beloved wife and places on him instead the firstborn honour. It would seem to be that that is the case. And chapter 37, verse 1 picks up on this. This is the account of Jacob, Joseph. It doesn't say this is the account of Jacob, Reuben, but says Joseph. And not only is he loved more than any other son, as we read this morning, but Dad has tailored a richly ornamented robe for him. Here we must take note of the detail. This is not a coat. It's not a parka. It's not a vest. It's a robe. It's the robe of royalty. The robe of the firstborn, the one who will one day rule the family. Now let's add to this that Jacob's family are God's chosen people. God has placed a promise over this as the Abrahamic Covenant. He's placed a promise over these. He's affirmed it to Isaac, and he's affirmed it to Israel. We could say that Joseph is the beloved, the favoured, the upheld prince of the people of God, with whom the Father is well pleased. Who does that sound like? Is that not a point forward? By the way, Margot yelled out that she still gets the prize. Was it you who yelled out, or was it Heather? Oh, Heather gets another chocolate. Kids, see Heather afterwards. Interestingly, I only picked this up the other day in reading some of this stuff. If I go back a couple of chapters to where Israel or Jacob has his name changed by God and he has wrestled with God and all those sorts of things, there is a covenant that God makes with Jacob. It's the Abrahamic covenant once again. It's reiterated to him. But one point is added. There's an addition to the covenant that does not exist in Abraham, in the promise to Abraham or the promise to Isaac, and that is that kings will come from you. What is Jacob doing? He's setting up a son as a king with a robe of royalty. And Jacob's love for his son Joseph could only be rivaled by his brother's hatred for him. How dare that young one be placed in this position? They hate him. Now I want you to imagine what that means. They hate him. They can't speak a kind word to him. When the narrative picks up the story in verse 4, Joseph is 17 years of age. How long has this gone on for? We don't know. Has it gone on for a year? Has it gone on for 3? Has it gone on since he was 3? How long? We don't know. But what we do know is that if you're a young teenager, 14, 15, 16, they're the formative years. They're the years where you can be broken. And who can break you? Those closest to you. Did they just not speak to him? Or did they throw his shoes on top of the roof? Did they trip him over in puddles? Did they pour buckets of water in his bed before he went to bed? Did they zip him up in his swag and roll him down the hill? Did they flush his head? What did this look like? Sorry? Oh, hang on. Whoa, we have a claim here. The claim is that they didn't have a flushing toilet. Interestingly, in the excavations of Ur of the Chaldeans, the source of Abraham, there is a flushing toilet. There you go. I think it has to be like second story and you know, to make it run, but I think it has to be filled back up with a bucket, but you get the idea. They won't speak to him. They hate him, one and all. They hate him. And it's not just a hatred of just, that aggression. It's more than that. They want to kill him. They're happy to kill him. This young man, already a man of rejection and suffering at the age of 17. Rejected by his own people. Now, does that sound like someone? Could you overlay the Christmas story here? What did Herod want to do? Yeah, kill him. I hate him. What did Jesus say? We read it last week. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things? And we know Joseph will one day be the deliverer, but it is going to start with suffering. And as the chapter continues, by verse 19, we see the murderous intent of the brothers. God has shown his hand, his purposes for Joseph, the dream. And the brothers are not happy. They say to each other, "Come now, let's kill him." This is not just murder. This is conspiracy to murder. Do you know, one person can kill someone quite easily. But to convince 10 people to kill one person, that's a lot harder. This is a conspiracy. His own people forming together to kill him. And if we follow this for a moment, what's the first thing they do in taking this out? They take his robe. They take the symbol of inheritance. Oh, anybody ringing some bells in your head right now? Matthew 21, verse 38. the parable of the tenants. They said to each other, "Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance." And from here, the sanitized version of Joseph needs to be erased from our minds. Your cartoon colouring in needs to be thrown in the bin. What do the brothers do? They grab him to kill him. Is that they grab him? Maybe it's guilt that he's been carrying for years. We don't know. Maybe, I'd like to think that maybe something outside of Reuben reached deep inside his soul and squeezed hard to get his attention and said, "Reuben, wake up. I need the boy. You need to protect him. Chuck him in a hole, that's fine, but just don't let them kill him." When we read in verse 23 that they stripped him of his robe, that Hebrew word used there is the same word used for skinning an animal. They scun him of his robe. It's violence. At its core, it has the assumption that he's already dead. He's a dead man walking. The term used for throwing him into the cistern is the term used for discarding of a dead carcass. They didn't place him in the cistern. They chucked him in the cistern. They kicked it in the hole. They drop him down into a dry, hard hole in the ground. Ever look down a dry well? Who's got a well on their place? Who's ever seen a well? A dry one. A dry one? What's in the bottom? Nothing. There's got to be something. What's in the bottom? Dirt, rocks, tools that have been, there's a pick in there, yep, there's a dead bone in there, whatever, right? It's a place of death. It's not a place of life. Death, hard and dry. And while Joseph lay bruised and bleeding, perhaps pleading for his life, what do his brothers do? They sit down for some 2-minute noodles and a cup of tea. You've got to be a psychopath, don't you? Like there's someone that he's had a fall, you don't know if he's broken his leg or anything. He's screaming, he's crying, he's calling out, he's wailing, and you sit down and have dinner? How do you do that? I can't eat with a dog barking, let alone my own flesh and blood crying. They sit down to recreate. They sit down for tea. They hated him. Well, tell me, who else was stripped of his clothes like a dead man walking? And who was then put in a hole dug in the rock? And who else had those people who did that to him sit down in front of him and recreate while he moaned and cried in pain? They cast lots for his clothing. Who was that? Isn't that a phenomenal parable? Such disregard for Joseph that his own people are then, well, they're not going to kill him, so what will we do? Let's sell him. So let's go from he's not worth anything, we'll kill him, to let's cash in on him, which I don't know, is that an even more grotesque thing to do to your own flesh, to anybody, to turn them into a commodity? Tell me, if you were aware that someone had been put into slavery to create the clothes on your back, would you wear those clothes? Probably not. Guess what? Most of the world doesn't want to know if there are people in slavery making clothes. But they're prepared to sell him. And sell him to who? Did you pick it up? The Ishmaelites. And who are they? They're descendants of Ishmael. Who's Ishmael? He's a son of Abraham. You have Ishmael, you have Isaac. Descendants of Ishmael, descendants of Isaac. Sorry, yes, descendants of Isaac. Descendant of Isaac is Jacob. So descendant of Jacob is these boys. They're cousins. They're selling their own brother to their cousins. They don't seem to have a problem with it. Yeah, sounds good. Right, yeah. And who's with them as well? If you continue reading, that caravan is not just Ishmaelites, it's also Midianites. Who are the Midianites? Well, they're the sons of Midian. Who's Midian? He's another son of Abraham. More cousins. Far out, they're all in on it. It's most likely that the Ishmaelites were the caravan drivers and the Midianites were the merchants employing the Ishmaelites to drive the caravan full of whatever's going to Egypt. How do you think the negotiations went? Do you think it's as easy as verse 28? He would have been stripped naked before all of those people. How many are we talking? Well, there's 10 brothers, plus Benjamin's probably not there. There's 10 brothers, so that's 10. Then there's the caravan drivers. Then there's the slaves of the caravan drivers. Then there's the merchants of the caravan drivers who are employing the caravan drivers. Then there's the slaves of the merchants of the caravan drivers. You get the idea. Sorry? 9, okay, sorry. Because Reuben wasn't there. No, you're not getting a number. He would have been stripped naked before his own extended family. Checked over like an object. Does he have all of his teeth? The shame of him. What did that exchange sound like? Tell me if this sounds reasonable, a reasonable exchange. Well, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? And the purchase price isn't a camel or some spice, but it is silver. Right there. Ding, 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 ding. That should ring an alarm bell. Matthew 26, verse 15. Judas asked, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? And so they counted out for him 30 silver coins. Joseph was sold for 20 shekels of silver. You might be going, I don't know what a shekel is. The value of a shekel is the same as a coin. Okay, 20 to 30 shekels of silver is the value of a slave at that time. The favoured son was sold as a slave for the bottom price, 20 shekels of silver. He is clearance stock. Get rid of him. Jesus was sold for 30 silver coins. 1 temple coin is equal to 1 shekel. Jesus is sold for the value of a slave. The Prince of the universe, sold for the value of the discarded. We come back to Reuben here. Chapter 37, verse 30. What does it say there? He, that's Reuben, he went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Does that sound familiar? Do those words sound familiar? What does Mary say in John? The Lord isn't there. They've taken my Lord's body away and I don't know where to find him. Where do I turn? He's not there. And so the suffering of Joseph goes from bad to worse. He's now sold into slavery, and that caravan is going from Israel or Canaan to Egypt. I've got a map for you, just in case you're a bit, where things are. Here we go, here's a Google map. And so you can see Egypt, the delta of Egypt is on the far left, just sort of half cut off. That's it's just starting. And then you have the Sinai Peninsula is in the centre of the screen essentially, and then you run up into the Gaza Strip and then into Israel to the right, to the top right. The guys are, if you look right at the top of the screen, you can see the word Urbid, and next to it is a blue sort of teardrop shaped thing. That's the Sea of Galilee, and we're south of the Sea of Galilee, we're east of the Sea of Galilee. There's a pointer. Oh, is it red? Oh. No, see, if the pointer's red, the colourblind people in the room can't see this. I have no idea where I'm pointing right now. Okay? So I have no idea. I can't see that at all. So do you want to point? It was third year uni before I worked out that there was a pointer on the screen. Anyway, so yeah, there we go. So we've got, I can see that red dot now. Interesting. So if you go to the left, Margo, we're left, a bit more, ooh, too far. Yep, about there. That's where we're selling Joseph. Okay, in the valley of Dothan. And then they're going to travel, they've got to get to the far left-hand side, the green bit on the far left-hand side. Actually, probably off the screen, somewhere there. Okay, that's what they've got to get to. So there's two routes to take. You can either go to the coast, and you can run down the coast, run down the Mediterranean Sea coastline, and go that way. To do that, you've got to go through the Gaza Strip, which is also the land of the Philistines. That may not necessarily be a good idea. The other way to go is you can go directly south, past the Dead Sea, somewhere there, jump up onto the high country, run down, go through the land where the Nabateans will live later on. And then head towards the land of Midian, and then you'll get down to about Eliat, down the bottom, the coastal port, to the Red Sea, and then cross across the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. That's the way you go today. If you ask Google Maps to take you there, like directions, it'll take you that way, and it will tell you that it's 822 kilometres, and it'll take you like 10 days to walk it. And 10 hours to drive it, 7 days to walk it. I don't know how you can walk 800 kilometres in 7 days, but apparently you can. Yeah, go through. Now look at the colour. That's a satellite picture. Look at the colour. I don't think you walk 100 k's a day. Not in that country. So it's going to take a while to walk a caravan, who knows what's on that caravan, plus slaves, down to Egypt. So how long does the suffering of Joseph just goes from now to worse. So he's had this emotional pain, he's had the humiliation, all that sort of stuff going on. He's been chucked in a hole, who knows what injuries he's carrying, and now he has to walk 800 k's. And lots of stops through hostile territory. That just sounds wearisome to me. How about you? What did he endure on the way? Had the blood dried from the injuries of his fall? Did flies get into his injuries? Did he pick maggots out each night? You go, whoa, you go, I'm just being real. Is his back sunburnt? Did he cry himself to sleep, hoping, calling out for his father for the comforts of home? And in doing so, the Midianite driver, he gets angry and takes his stick and whacks him on the head with it. Go to sleep. Likely. Don't think they made his bed for him. Did he get cracked feet? Did his lips get that crusty white stuff on them when you get dehydrated? You know the stuff. Yeah, that stuff. Did he get that? When he gets to Egypt, how does the captain of the guard, the guy who's in charge of protecting the most powerful man on the planet, Pharaoh, how does that guy whip his slaves into shape? Phrase we still use today, I'll whip you into shape. What is the feeling of the whip? I don't know. I live in a country where that has never, it's never happened to me. We don't know. We're so removed from this story and we've sanitized it into cartoons. But there is one who does know what this stuff feels like. There is one who does know what it's like to be led away shackled. There is someone who does know what it feels like to be whipped. And not by an Egyptian whip, but a Roman whip. What does it feel like to be falsely accused? Your readings will be up to this by this point. To be falsely accused. The accusation is not, she stole my chocolates. The accusation is, he tried to sleep with me. You're being accused of messing with someone's wife. And it's not just like in a civil society. You're a foreigner. You're a slave with no rights. What does that feel like? What is it like to be tried and convicted by false testimony? Well, actually, you weren't even tried. You were just chucked in the cell. What is it like to be caged when you are innocent? Does anybody here know that? Have you ever experienced it? I haven't. The closest thing we've got to it is, I've got to wear a mask. Oh, my rights have been infringed. Yesterday, we got notice that one of the sons of Molan Baptist Church, Harry Handybo, Harry is at University of Newcastle, and it's his two mates who are the two COVID tests positive. So he's a close contact. He has now been isolated to a very small room, and he's locked in there for 14 days. Harry would be one of the most exuberant people persons you could imagine. He'd walk into this room, He'd work out who you are. He'd go, hey, he'd have your whole life story in 10 minutes. You're like, Harry, I don't know how to do this. You tire us and you do it so much. That's Harry. He's now locked in a room. What did he do? He had mates. We don't know what most of this stuff feels like. Let's make it even deeper. Let's go really close to the heart. Let's think about Jacob. What does it feel like to lose a son? To have him taken from you? To have him killed, or so you thought, or to not know what happened, not have closure? What does that feel like? I don't know what that feels like. I can't even imagine that. I don't dare imagine that. I have an 18-year-old son. I don't dare to go there. Perhaps you do, perhaps you don't. But there is one who knows exactly what that feels like. And he watched. Yet through all this mess, chapter 39 shows us that the Lord was with Joseph. What we're going to do, we're going to read a little bit of that right now. Chapter 39. Well, have we got time? Secretary says we've got time. Read it.
Okay, so Joseph chapter 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favour in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, "My master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story: "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favour in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Some time later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them.
Thank you. What's going on here? Things have shifted a gear, haven't they? See, through all the mess, the Abrahamic Covenant holds. And God will bless those, He's going to look after them, and at the same time He's going to bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. The blessing of the Lord is upon Joseph. And as we go through there, though life sucks, the Lord is with Joseph. And this with him is tangible. It's experienceable. That's the word. Potiphar knows it. He sees it. He experiences it in Joseph. He sees something amazing. He puts him in charge of everything. He's a foreigner. He's a slave. And he's elevated him to basically the firstborn. The household knows it. Potiphar doesn't concern himself with anything that he's got his hand in. The narrative wants us to know that it is the blessing of the Lord that rests on the house because of Joseph being there and God's blessing on Joseph. Potiphar's wife knows it, and it's appealing to her. She's mistaken this appealingness of the blessing of God for something other than what it is. She thinks it's sexual, and she wants it. Or make sport, so it says. Joseph himself knows that the Lord is with him because he speaks about sinning against God. Where is Joseph's accountability group? Where's his prayer triplet? Who's going to keep him accountable for not doing the wrong thing? Is it there? No. And yet he says, how could I sin against God? He knows that God is with him. He knows that the Almighty watches. And then once again, in the depths of despair in the dungeon of Pharaoh, the warden knows it too. And just like Potiphar's household, because the Lord is with Joseph, the warden pays no attention to anything under Joseph's care. How easy is that job? You've got a guy, he's free, and everything runs like clockwork. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Employers, how would you go? Yeah. The cupbearer knows it and the baker knows it. We stopped our story just there. But by chapter 41, even the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, knows that the Lord is with Joseph. Pharaoh says to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger, put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen, robes of royalty in Egypt. He put a gold chain around his neck. He made him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, make way. Think about that. You're an Egyptian citizen, and you are telling Egyptian citizens to get out of the way for a slave. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said, you shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. From the dungeon to the throne. In suffering, the Lord is made known. God does not waste suffering. He doesn't waste the suffering of Joseph. If we fast forward to the time of Jesus, there in the narrative of the Nativity in Matthew chapter 2, this is what Matthew records. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children. Who? Rachel, Joseph's mom. Weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. Why? Because all the baby boys in Bethlehem have been massacred. In that hideous tragedy, in the darkness of that narrative, in that terrible suffering, the dawn of light emerges. Luke chapter 1. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, for he has come. And he has redeemed his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. Terrible suffering. God does not waste it. He uses it to shine mercy on those living in darkness. And ultimately, that baby, that proclamation was over. Praise be to the Lord. That baby grows to manhood. The Lord is known in the suffering of Jesus. And the suffering of Jesus was never, ever, ever wasted. How does Philippians teach us? Chapter 2, famous verse, we sing it, that the suffering of Jesus, being found in human likeness, oh, how that must be frustrating for him. To be found like me. Found like you. Being found removed from the royal palace of heaven, so to speak, taking the very nature of a servant, a slave, being humbled and made obedient, and was obedient to death on a cross. In this, every knee should bow, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. It's not wasted. The Lord is made known in the Easter story. God does not waste the suffering of Joseph. While Joseph was subjected to being made to feel worthless, to be sold as a slave, God was preparing him. He was refining him. He was sticking him in the fire to burn off everything so that all that's left is gold. He's preparing him so that when people came to him pleading, hungry, starving, with nothing to offer, feeling worthless, he would know and he'd understand. While Joseph was slave in Potiphar's house, God used this time to train him, prepare him, because he has a responsibility to run a nation. What do you do when you run a household? Food in, waste out. Clothing in, rubbish out. Beds, safety, the dog is fed, etc. That's running a house. Running a home is different. That's the people and emotion. But running the house is very boom, 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 boom. What's he going to do? He's about to go into overdrive. Food in, waste out. While Joseph was prisoner in Pharaoh's dungeon, God used this time to show him, to teach him how the other half lived. The ones you've never experienced, Joseph, because you had the robe of royalty in your father's tent. You don't know what the criminals look like. You don't know what it looks like for the conniving and the deceitful, except your brothers. And so he was dumped in the middle of them. And he actually runs them. He organises them. He gets to know them, knows how their brains think. Do you think he got ripped off a couple of times in the cigarette exchange of prison? Whatever the currency was in there? Of course he would. He gets to understand it, work it out. So that when it comes to big deals in moving multitudes of grain, he's clued up as to all the little tiny ways someone might want to do the dirty work. Joseph was 17 when he entered Potiphar's house. He's 28 when he interprets the cupbearer and the baker's dreams. And he has to wait 3 more years to be remembered for that. In this long suffering, 13 years to get to Pharaoh, God was teaching him patience. Because when you are storing up for 7 years, you've got to be patient. You've got to be patient for that stuff that comes out of the ground. It's green generally. It comes up and then it's got to grow. You got to wait for more rain, it grows more. That takes patience. When it's in head, but it's not quite, it's still green, it hasn't gone golden yet, you've got to wait. The storm is coming, you've got to wait. Patience. When you have a multitude of it, and you really want to gorge on it because you want to enjoy the fat of the land, but there's 7 years of hardness coming, you've got to be patient. You've got to measure it. You've got to be calm and stable. God is teaching him this, so he would be ready for the job at hand. And it is a huge job. Can I just have a show of hands? We're in a farming community. How many here are farmers or directly related to a farm? A significant proportion. Okay. We're 18 months past it now, but we had a 3-year drought. How brutal was that on if it was you, the farmer, or a farmer you know? How brutal? Was it category 10 brutal? There were concerns about mental health, about where the guns are, etc. Category 1, everything is fine, we're surfing. Are we closer to 10 or are we closer to 1? We're 8. Exactly right. It's brutal. And that was for 3 years in the most affluent country in the world, where we didn't run out of grain. We're about to go 7 years with no social checks and balances, no government saying, oh, drought aid is coming, or whatever. God does not waste suffering. And so my question for you is, how are you with your suffering? Because guaranteed we are all suffering somewhere. You might be suffering physically, you might be suffering emotional, mental, spiritual. Harry's probably going through physical, mental, emotional and spiritual right now. What are you suffering with? What are you doing with it? Are you there saying, why, oh why? If you are, can I direct you back to Joseph? And go and find him saying, why, oh why? See, God has a plan and a purpose for you, just like he has a plan and a purpose for everybody. And if he needs to use suffering to refine you, to shove you in the fire and burn off the garbage so that gold remains, and that's what he's going to do. And generally, we don't like to go willingly. We have to go kicking and screaming. Is your question why? Or is your question, all right, God, what do you want me to do with this? How long do you want me to sit in this, Father, before you show me what it's all about? We're not good at asking God direct questions. It's not something we do in Western culture. Say, Father, please answer me. Tell me, show me, send someone to tell me. We're not good at asking that. We sort of want to divorce ourselves from that God would actually want to be interpersonal with us. We're scared of that. Because if we're scared of that, in reality, because your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, that's really scary because it means that I have no kingdom myself. But my bank balance says that I do. God does not waste suffering. And so maybe it should be a challenge to all of us to rethink our suffering. Not in terms of how bad is it. And it is bad, and I get that. But instead, that God calls me to rejoice in it. And that's counter-cultural, that's counter-emotive, that's counter to the flesh. What does Paul say to you in Romans chapter 5? Rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out his love into our hearts by his Holy Spirit. God used Joseph's suffering for incredible fruitfulness. It was not wasted. And the detail on that, if we would care to look, is massive. But if you want to narrow it down to one thing that Joseph has realized, what does Joseph call his children in Egypt? He has 2 children born to him from a prophetess of a foreign god, or the daughter of a prophetess of a foreign god. He has 2 children. What are their names? Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh is the firstborn. Do you know what Manasseh means? It means God has made me forget my suffering. God has made me forget my trouble. What does Ephraim mean? Because God has made me fruitful in the land that I suffered. Far out. Imagine naming your children that. Forgotten sorrow and fruitful from sorrow. In your suffering, in my suffering, have we, do we, will we look to God and instead of whinging, submit ourselves to his plan and his purposes? Joseph's suffering to eventually bring his family to Egypt is a foreshadow, an example, a pointer to the intense suffering, the ultimate suffering that the promised one would endure in order to bring all of humanity to where he will be. Because God has a plan. That plan has not changed since the garden. To shift people from death to life, slavery to freedom, darkness to light, atheism to theism, non-believer to believer, non-Christian to Christian, agnostic to believer. Keep going, you can keep going, keep going. It's the same words. For in suffering, God is known. And to draw you back to our 5 solas, in suffering, God makes his character known. The God of compassion and mercy and grace. I've got you, I love you. In suffering, his presence is known. My God walks with me. He is the comforter. And his name is known. My Lord, the Lord Jesus himself, washes me and has gone before me. Character, presence, name. God is glorified in your suffering. It's whinging. God is glorified in how you suffer. That sounds weird. I don't like that. No, I don't. But it's true. Paul chained to a wall in a Roman cell. No, not a Roman cell. Yes, a Roman cell. Do you reckon he suffered? Pretty sure he tells you he suffers. God is glorified. You're a product of what he did. Somewhere in your mindset, you are a product of what Paul went through. While the people suffer under the whip of Pharaoh 4 generations after Joseph, God says to Moses, I am. He gives him his name. I have heard, I have come down, I will rescue, I will be known, is what God says. While the people suffer in the darkness, separated from God because of Pharisaical law, Jesus declares, I am, and I have come, and I have made known. The Philippians passage, how does it end? Every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Jesus suffered for the glory of God. And he calls you to walk in his footsteps and suffer. Because he's got a plan and a purpose to bring people from darkness to light. And on that road to Emmaus, Jesus said, do not the Christ have to suffer these things? And beginning with Moses, he explained to them what was said in all the scripture concerning himself. Let me pray for you. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the character, the person of Joseph. We thank you for what you did to him and for him, for other people. Father, we thank you for the great promises that you have laid upon mankind. And Father, we thank you for the fulfillment of those through Jesus. Father, we ask that you would refine our mindset and our heart to seek you in all things, to look to the God of all things, the provider of all things, and the one who cares for us most desperately and most deeply. And for us to submit to you and hold on to you in all aspects of life, we pray. Amen.